passage is a lot. I kind of wish it were just the first 2 verses with the mustard seed. What a simple and beautiful passage of faith that is both so short and so rich with meaning. It is simply enough. But that is not our gospel this morning. Instead, we get a series of very complicated questions right after these 2 simple verses that end with the line, "We are worthless slaves. We have done only what we ought to have done." That last line, "We are worthless slaves," feels like a weight sitting on my shoulders. You can feel your spine compress and your jaw clench. We are worthless slaves. I personally do not know how helpful this line is for me and my faith. And I'm not sure if anyone has ever tried to call someone worthless, or even worse, a worthless slave. But I can guarantee it did not go well for anyone involved. And if you have, please come to my office tomorrow. We can talk about it. But the weight of those words, the weight of "we are worthless slaves." I don't need to go through a history of the United States or even just the state of Kentucky to acknowledge the pain that still hangs in the air. But I can speak for myself with my colorful shoes and my dangly earrings as a young, ordained woman raised in the beautiful South. I don't need my faith connected to worthlessness. I get enough of that in our broken world. And to be clear, I'm talking about the literal use of the word worthlessness, unprofitable, useless, having no value. The one who does not see me as a human being. Worthless, meaning my value is contingent on my productivity or usefulness. Not faith the size of a small, minuscule mustard seed. The only other occurrence of this word worthlessness comes in Matthew. Only appears twice in all of the New Testament. In Matthew, it is with the parable of the talents, a little bit of a different story, but still about worth and money. And again, like our gospel this morning in Luke, in the very last line, Matthew says, "As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." The weight continues to pile on. We are worthless slaves. The kind of worthlessness that would rather throw me into the outer darkness where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. You have no value. So why don't you go to the outer darkness away from here where you will be consumed? And maybe then you might have value. The weight of the world on our shoulders. A worthlessness that can so easily allow the disease of addiction to thrive when the shame and the guilt and the pure weight of it all can be paralyzing. hence turning to a dependence on a powerful suppressant to numb it all. Or that kind of dependence where you're forced to rely on someone else, whether it's for financial reasons, medical conditions, or even emotionally. Your life temporarily or permanently becomes dependent on someone else. Your value depends on another person. We are worthless slaves. And maybe there are some people out there that need to be humbled by those words, or their ego checked. But I, standing in this place, would rather think about my relationship with God through the eyes of faith, the size of a small mustard seed, that can still thrive in the weirdest and most unlikely of circumstances, that can be uprooted and planted in the middle of the sea. But those first two lines, not the only ones in our gospel. So what are we to do with the complicated rest of it all? In this past week, I spent some time down in North Carolina. Our Bishop Mark convened all of the dioceses of Appalachia, East Carolina with Brian Cole, or East Tennessee with Brian Cole, Bishop Jose in Western North Carolina, West Virginia, Southwest Virginia. It's the first time ever that this group of people got together living in the same geographic region. A region, as many of y'all know, that wrestles with these same questions. How are we worthy? How do we be examples of Christ when the world, or even ourselves, sees us as worthless? How do we continue to find hope and be examples of hope when the weight of the world just feels so heavy? And together, this group of us, we did some training. We did some training on asset-based community development, ABCD, to give us a structure for answering those really complicated questions. And the very short summary of those 3 days of training is based in our gospel this morning. To look through faith the size of a mustard seed. In its very name, it is asset-based. The goal is to focus on the gifts in a community, not to get stuck in the spiral of the needs or the deficits, but to be surprised by what assets are already in our midst, what gifts are just waiting to be found. To find that little mustard seed and increase them, to nurture them, to let them grow. Not to ignore the need, but to look at it from a new perspective. And maybe, just maybe, an unlikely circumstance or an unlikely gift may emerge. So looking at our gospel, what if we looked at this complicated set of questions with that very lens, as an asset-based community development perspective? How might our gospel shift if we look at the gifts? So we started with the very first complicated question. Jesus says, "Who among you would say to your slave who has just come in from plowing or tending the sheep in the field, come here at once and take your place at this table?" So if we look for the gift in that question, if we find the faith the size of a mustard seed, we see Jesus again asking a question about worth. The next verse says, would you not rather say to him, prepare supper for me, put on your apron, and serve me while I eat and drink, and later, after your full days of work and feeding me, you may eat and drink. These complicated questions in this new perspective get a little bit more of what Jesus was intending. I imagine Jesus as being a bit sassy or sarcastic in these questions. Would you rather not say to him? It's a rhetorical question. A rhetorical question where the answer is no. Because Jesus is asking in a very sassy way that this person who's just come in from plowing or tending the sheep, which is labor-intensive work. It is backbreaking. It is painful. It is in the hot sun all day long. That you would tell them immediately when they come in, maybe to air condition for the first time, maybe for the first time all day, that they do not go and sit down and rest, but instead keep working. Not for themselves, but for you, to make you dinner. And then, when all of that is done and all of their exhaustion, they can eat. The answer is no. Any reasonable person would see that, and you can see what's happening here. Jesus is stressing how utterly ridiculous this question is. Jesus is being countercultural. To say a person's worth or value in this world is not bound by their constant productivity or need to do something. But instead, we see this gift. What if? What if this passage is about being invited into relationship, invited to the table? Come here at once and take your place at the table. What if instead you saw this exhausted and tired human that they are and said, please come here and sit down and rest. And please share a meal with me after a long, hard day at work. What if this passage is not about work at all? It's about the place at the table. That no matter the relationship, master to slave, worker to boss, dependent to powerful, all of them have a place at the table. What if that's the gift? To see, regardless of your station, that each and every person has the light of Christ dwelling within them. Not because they're productive or helpful, but that even faith the size of a very tiny mustard seed is both so simple and so rich with possibility. It is simply enough. I'll close with an old invitation to communion that I learned back a long time ago in North Carolina. An invitation to communion that we were about to celebrate in just a minute. And maybe you too might see a new gift. Notice a subtle shift in yourselves. Or be pleasantly surprised by an ancient tradition. We're about to consume the body and bread of Christ as a physical reminder that faith, even the size of a mustard seed or a communion wafer, is simply enough. So my invitation: come to this table. You who have much faith, and you who would like to have more. You who have been often, and you who have not been in a very long time. You who have tried to follow Jesus, and you, like many of us, who have failed. Come. It is Christ who invites us to meet him here. Amen.